All right. Well, welcome back to Wisdom for the Church. I have a guest that's been on with me once before. That's John Harris. He is a podcaster, cultural commentator, and I think does a lot of other things. John, how you doing, man?
Yeah, thanks. Good to see you, John. Appreciate it.
I said does a lot of other things because I think you do some writing. Your husband, father. You have a day job too, right?
That I'll be coming out early next year, and I have an album, actually a music album coming out, and so I just create a bunch of stuff. That's what I do, I guess.
Create a bunch of stuff. Okay. Genre of the album. It's like country.
It's like folk country. There's some like ragtime and rock and roll stuff in there too, but I listened to country growing up, and that's what I tend to gravitate towards. But I don't know. Everyone thinks they're eclectic. If you listen to it, I mean, I'll say, oh, I'm kind of eclectic. Every song's different, but people will probably like look at it and be like, oh, that's country. So that's what I'll go with. Yeah.
Yeah. It's John Harris, whatever it is. It's a personal album.
It is me. Yeah. I wrote all the songs on it. So
yeah. When is that coming out?
It's supposed to be January 1st, and I got to call the guy that's producing it because we put out one single that we kind of rushed because the election. It was before the election. We wanted to get it out, and we recorded it 2 weeks before the election. So, but then there's 9 other songs that, have yet to come out, and I've seen some mixes, but we don't have any final mixes. So, I'm still praying and hoping that January 1st. If not, it'll be no later than January 10th, though.
Yeah. Well, that'd be exciting. Look forward to hearing some of those songs. So,
thanks.
Country John Harris. That's got to be a fun one.
Yeah, well, I've been playing music most of my life. So,
yeah, you play guitar, right?
I do. Yeah, that's my main instrument.
Yeah, I feel like I've seen a clip or something you playing guitar before. So, any like random ones in there? You throw a flute in there or anything?
Actually, for one song, yes, there is a flute, and I play harmonica on a few of the songs, and there's some banjo and mandolin, and we're supposed to get a violin or a fiddle player to lay down a few tracks, some electric guitar, drums, bass, piano. There's a bunch of instruments depending on the song.
Yeah. So not just guitar and not even just flute, but basically a little bit of everything. That's awesome.
Yeah. People want to check it out, johnharristunes.com, if they're listening after it's come out and they want to. You can download the first song now. So johnharristunes.com.
Okay. Yeah. I'll try to put a link in the description. Well, today, John has been gracious to give some time here. We're going to be talking about a posture of sobriety, keeping a posture of sobriety in our time, basically. So I had a few initial thoughts, and then we can kind of get into some give and take here. So when I say posture of sobriety, sober, being under control. Do not be drunk with wine, but be under the control of the Holy Spirit. Sobriety, though, doesn't mean stoicism necessarily, some lack of showing emotion, but means being over or under control. My working attempt at a definition of being a sober type of Christian is this. Sobriety means walking humbly with your God and allowing Him, by the governing power of the Holy Spirit, using the authority of the Word of God to gear your affections rightly. And your expressions of emotion will then flow appropriately based on category and level of importance. So, still, we will have emotions as image bearers of God and particularly as Christians, but our emotions will flow in the direction of what is appropriate based on God's heart, based on category, and based on level of importance. So category, like, it's my family or a family over on the other side of the world. Most of the time, based on category, my emotions should be a bit stronger for things going on in my category in a one-to-one scenario than another family. But even then, there are levels of importance within that category. Like my sister, if she eats a sandwich, I'm not that excited about that. If she graduates from college, I'm much more excited about that, and rightly so. And so I still express emotion, but it depends on category and how important. And I believe, John, I'll kind of get into a premise here that some people in our culture are a bit too numb toward things, as in they disconnect, they don't care, and therefore, really, there's no show of any sort of passion for anything or any sort of righteous anger or any sort of joy. But then on the flip side, which I think is maybe a bigger problem, is I think that we have a problem with sometimes over emoting, sometimes not being able to express emotions appropriately based on a situation. I've seen this in personal conflicts. Like everything seems to be a 10, even though it could be a 3, and we could work this out. And so that's some premise I'm going with here, is I think that we just have a lack of ability to work through interpersonal conflicts. I'll go as believers specifically. And our emotions just do not fit the crime, so to speak, a lot of times, but wanted to get your thoughts. Is there merit to what I'm saying? Anything strike you just in that description I gave?
Yeah, I think you got your finger on the pulse of what is happening, especially on internet discourse. I don't want to get into the habit of looking at X, which is probably what we're thinking of more than any other social media platform, and considering that representative necessarily. It is a big portion of people who are on there, but it's not representative of all people. I would say most people in my church have no clue what's going on X. It's mostly a particular kind of person, a political, sometimes chronically online person. So I don't think all the views that are represented there are necessarily representative, but I do think that the people who are on there and chronically online and get wrapped up in every little disagreement and issue and need to have an opinion on it right away, even though they're not experts and don't understand it. I think it does translate into your personal life. And I think there are enough people on there and enough high profile people that we should be concerned that there's a lot of pooling of ignorance and a lot of coming to decisions, not because it's a conviction, due to the fact that you've studied the issue or lived in, you've had the experience and you have knowledge that can be thought of as actually true because it's based in something real. But I think sometimes people are looking at, how will this benefit my position, or how will this help my friends and hurt my enemies, and those kinds of things. And sometimes it's just follow the leader. It's just like a snap judgment. Yeah. So those are kind of impulsive things that I try to shy away from, but it's definitely prevalent. And I don't know if there's any signs that it's getting any better online, at least.
True. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, a lot of, especially on certain probably social media apps, which are good and can be used for good. It's almost like there's designed for some mudslinging, which at times there needs to be, sometimes that's okay. Like sometimes we need to be sharpening and arguing and things like that. But there are times, sure, where that, specifically on like a Twitter, like X as it's called now, for sure, it's just almost made for hot takes and hot reactions, so to speak. But when it comes to the clicks and that kind of thing. Yeah. I mean, the most controversial is going to get the most replies, and their replies to replies and all that. So in terms of the day to day, or kind of maybe a little more offline, although the two worlds are obviously connected, there's part of God's world, online and offline. I think it still holds true overall in our everyday sort of relationships. I had, maybe this will be some food for thought, food for conversation, a couple proverbs that I picked out that might represent what I think goes on sometimes. If one gives an answer before he hears, it is folly and shame. If one gives an answer before he hears, it's folly and shame. Just blurting out something, not knowing all the facts. Proverbs 26, whoever meddles in a quarrel not his own is like one who takes a passing dog by the ears. And I don't know where exactly it is as well, but there's the proverb about basically The one who speaks first seems right until the cross-examination comes. So a lot of proverbs about speaking before you really know the full story, as well as there's this thing going on over here that might not even really be in your jurisdiction. And yet, here you are. So in terms of the last 5-6 years for you, you can talk about online, but offline, have you seen these kinds of things play out in an era of COVID, an era of elections, an era of this or that? And, what have you learned from those kind of scenarios?
Well, I've learned there's a lot of cowardice out there. There's people who know the truth, should speak up, and they won't because they know the consequences, or they fear the consequences that maybe aren't there. But they sometimes it's as nefarious as they just want to snuggle up to the prevailing opinion of the people in charge of things. And so it's a way to preserve themselves. So I would actually think that the problem is people did not weigh in as much as they should have when they knew the truth. That's what I've seen more than anything. But post 2020, I've noticed that there's been a lot more, I would say, especially, the left wing was always crazy from saying, even prominent figures saying really nutty things, and they would be defended for it. But I see on the right, I don't know if these figures are as prominent, but there's definitely a growing kind of grassroots online presence of guys who say outrageous things that they certainly haven't thought through. I think just to start a fight, just to maybe sometimes they sincerely believe what they're saying, but they'll throw something out there that's meant to be intentionally provocative, even though it's really not relevant to anything, but it will hit the buttons of
absolutely
guys on the left, let's say, and maybe even some guys on the right too. But it picks a fight, and wherever there's smoke, there's fire, and people want to come look at and observe what's happening. And so there's a lot of rubbernecking that happens, and that means views, and that means I think there's also there's a few things going on. I think there's a new dynamic of valuing some of the virtues that have been forgotten, like courage, but oftentimes you can
talked about that.
What's that?
When you and I talked last, it was actually about courage.
Yeah, well, you brought up sobriety this time, which is also one of the cardinal virtues. So, there's 4 cardinal virtues. And so I guess we'll have to have 2 more episodes to talk about the other 2. But sobriety is, I think, must channel courage. So sobriety is essentially self-control, clear thinking, prudence to some extent, but also prudence and wisdom actually are another cardinal virtue. They're separate. This is putting limitations up. This is, as the word implies, you're in alcoholism. If you're drunk, you're not sober. It's the opposite. So, sobriety is having a clear head about things and being able to discern and avoid destructive behaviors and vices and those kinds of things. And I think that because courage is so often neglected, there are guys who want to substitute brazenness, brashness, sometimes just being a jerk for courage. And I can understand why sometimes those 2 things can be hard to, especially if you don't know the person, hard to separate. Yeah. Because this person seems passionate. They're very, they might seem very principled and very sure of themselves. Yeah. I think the difference is when you're brazen and I would say when you are just being provocative to be provocative, and it's not really coming from a place of bravery, or courage, the motivations are different. And it could very much be, instead of taking a hard stand that's going to cost you, you're taking a hard stand with the perception that it will cost you, but also knowing there's going to be a reward. So, there's a large group of people that will reward you for that kind of behavior, because 5 seconds ago, it was something punishable, and it was it's like in economics, something that's rare is worth more. So it's something that was in high demand because people weren't saying it. And now you're going to say it. And maybe you'll even go 10 steps farther to separate yourself from softer, quote unquote, people. So there is, I think, a strategy in even platform building that wants to say outrageous things and be provocative. And if you can pick fights with big people, then that even puts more attention on what you're doing, right? So there's a motive there. That's sometimes hard to discern initially, but
of course,
over time, I think it reveals itself what someone's truly in it for, and why they would be saying some of the things they're saying. Sobriety channels that that urge to be a truth teller and call people out and be brave and do the right thing. Sobriety tells you when that's appropriate, when it's not, as you just read, when it's a fight that you're supposed to be involved in, when it's not. It gives you, it keeps you from getting into fights for your own pride or superficial motivations. So, I think what I've seen, to put a cap on it, is especially after 2020, and especially after Elon Musk took the ban off of Twitter, that was, I guess, influencing the algorithm and so forth. There's an opportunity out there to build platforming. If you have platforming, you have advertising, you have ways to make money. And it's hard for me to accuse any one person of doing that, but I think there are people doing it, and I think that there's definitely a change in the tone that you can pick up on, or at least in many conversations. Like the other day, there was a stupid conversation online. I was like, why are we arguing over this? This makes no sense. I don't understand why this is even something people are getting passionate about. It really has no effect on my life, but that's what people want to get riled up about. So we haven't really put a lot of specifics on this, but if you want to try to go down some roads, I'll try to come up with some examples and we can talk about them.
Sure. Yeah, I think that'll be a great road to go down. I mean, what I'm getting from you, based on our conversation last time as well as this time, about having a stable head about things, courage and sobriety are not enemies, but they are friends. And you talked more about courage there a little bit, and the difference between that and being brash, or there's underneath courage, there's some sort of selflessness going on. There's a lack of selfishness. Obviously you care about what happens to you because it's things that affect you. But if you're being courageous, usually you're putting your best interest kind of on the line for what's right. And usually that's going to affect people that are hurting or who are being oppressed or whatever. Right. But the sobriety element comes in where it's not an enemy to courage, but rather a friend. It's allowing you to know, how do I use this instinct that I have in a way that's good. And obviously, I think maybe you mentioned it. A lot of people, including I'm sure myself at times, can say, "Oh, that's not wise," or "Oh, but that's not being sober," but rather, maybe that's just me being a coward. So there's that element too of like something that looks very wise and self-controlled. Actually, no, it was they were just failing to speak up, kind of like you mentioned earlier. But yeah, you mentioned going down a few roads. We can go down if you have any specific examples from your life or what you've seen in the past 3 years of sobriety coming to save the day, along with courage being there. If that's what you were talking about, the roads you wanted to go down.
Yeah, I think someone who's pretty sober-minded, and it doesn't mean that there aren't exceptions. We all make mistakes and say things sometimes that maybe we shouldn't, but someone like a John MacArthur, I think, who's pretty recognizable, I'm sure, to your audience, I think has a lot of sobriety as far as when he weighs in on something, on an issue, he doesn't generally do it in ignorance and with the intention of causing fights. He often wants to build unity, and that's why he says what he says. And he says it in a calm tone. And even if he's being firm, like he was during the COVID situation, and he's a few times taken the governor of the state of California to task. He does so with a lot of resoluteness and knowledge of the situation. He knows the working issues. He's not doing it out of ignorance. He's not flailing and railing and having a cow. He's, I think, resting in the providence of God as he says what he's saying, and he's looking at the situation realistically. I think one of the things that unfortunately blinds people today is this, and it really substitutes for religion, is ideology. And there's all kinds of ideologies out there, but basically ideology is taking a principle, a part of creation. I'm boiling this down, but there's a lot more could be said, but for the sake of time, and making that a universal standard that unlocks every door. So we want to be principled. We don't want to be ideological. We don't want to take one thing like equality or hierarchy for that matter, or I already said equality or freedom, or, I'm thinking of some of the things people use for ideology, and they craft their whole entire view of life around it. And we don't want to do that. When we do that, I think it blinds us, and it makes everything very rigid, very black and white. There is no ability to be diplomatic or recognize sometimes motivations that might not be nefarious when you're attacking someone. Like maybe that person doesn't deserve the attack. Maybe they're ignorant. Maybe there's something else going on. We tend to see things very rigidly when we get into an ideology. And so I think people right now are latching onto a lot of different things. There are some people, to their credit, like Russell Brand is one right now that I've noticed, who are reaching back into the past, and they're trying to figure out, okay, where did we go wrong? Oh, wait a minute, Christianity. And he's become somewhat of a devout Christian from what I understand. But there's a lot of other people looking for answers to the ailments of our modern age, and they're finding them in different ideologies. So that could even be something, sometimes those are good things initially, like the manosphere, for example. Hey, we're too feminized, right? Let's talk about that, and let's renew masculinity and try to talk about what a man is and teach people and provide good examples. That's all great. But if you make your whole entire view of life and your whole entire philosophy and every issue routes back to being something related to masculinity, well, there's a great many things that are that masculinity touches on. There's no question, but not everything is about that, and not everything. I'll be candid and give you an example of something that I think I might offend some people with this, because I have some friends who are very big on this.
Buckle up.
Something like going around and talking about the 19th Amendment, right? And so like I understand that
women's right to vote.
That's right. Yeah. So I understand that I studied that years ago, and I remember coming to the conclusion, reading primary sources from the time, that this was not the general Christian, I would say more orthodox Christian position. The more, I would say, solid biblical Christians who were thinking through this issue biblically and according to the creation norms that God has set down, came to the conclusion that this would be a bad thing and would eventually lead to women in the military and that kind of thing. And there was a few reasons, but the biggest reason was because the government's role is to bear the sword. And once you start saying that women have a say in who bears the sword and how the sword is born, and they're crafting policy essentially, even if it's in a menial way, there's no reason to prevent them from becoming politicians. There's no reason to prevent them from serving in the military or in the police force. And then you've started to erode the boundaries between men and women. And they saw this. I mean, there's actually an article in the Atlantic, of all places, that you can read from that time period, which makes this case. And it actually does it pretty well, right? Okay. That being said, as a historical thing, I get that. Now, is the United States in a position right now? Is it like even close to being able politically to do anything to reverse the 19th Amendment? Not even close.
Yep.
And there's a lot of other things that would have to fall into place before any kind of political move like that were even possible if you wanted to do something like that.
Sure.
But there are guys who, I should probably separate things. There are guys who say hey, we should never have done that. I get it. I understand the argument.
Mm-hmm.
Fine. That's different though than other guys who I've noticed online who bring it up all the time, who make it like every issue comes back to that. And
yeah, even if it doesn't connect to that.
Yeah, even if it's not really a direct connection, it's always like, things would be better if we didn't have this. This is like, and here's the problem. It can become an ideology because you start blaming that thing for everything. Every problem is that.
Sure.
There's guys online on both the left and right who want to blame every single problem on the Jews, right? And like, I can understand there is if you're trying to build a Christian society, then to have people who are not Christians, who are high achieving and have somewhat of an in-group preference for people who think and act like them, that's going to present a problem if you are trying to exert influence, that's Christian influence, whether it's Jewish or Hindu or, whatever. But if you start saying it's the Jews on every single problem, and you make that an ideology, so it's rigid now. It's the script is written before the evidence even comes in, and this is just the way that the world works. Mm-hmm. Then you've bought into a false, like it's something that potentially can give you a lot of false information and make you believe lies, and it makes you the kind of person who says bombastic, provocative things because people are going to take offense when you start blaming groups of people. That you can't necessarily attribute it to them, or maybe it's not all their fault, or you know what I mean, or there's exceptions to it. So you're not actually viewing the full picture. You're reducing reality down to a cartoon, and that's what I see a lot of happening today. So there's really the symptom. That's a symptom of something else, which I think is the loss of transcendent value, which we really is the loss of Christianity, and the looking for something that's going to make sense of life because we don't have Christianity. Even Christians are doing this kind of thing, ironically.
100%.
But I think there's a lot of there's just a lot of lack of wisdom in that. And I know we're bringing up another cardinal virtue. There's just it's a lack of prudence and wisdom and not valuing those things. Wisdom can be complicated. Wisdom can be messy. Wisdom can have to look at circumstances where it's not clear at first and have to gather information and make decisions and then have a sobriety.
There we go.
Have an analysis that prevents you from displaying your worst demons as you discuss it. And then when you have those things in place, you can have courage. You can make bold stands. You can be sure of yourself. Yeah. But you got a lot of guys that are ready, shoot, fire, or ready, fire, aim. There you go. Thank you.
I say that because I've fallen into that a time or two in my life. The ready, fire, aim.
I've done it. Yeah, I've done it. And then you find out, oh, I got that situation wrong.
Yeah. It's interesting. You mentioned something going on. There's something going on with. Right now, because there has been, maybe I'm getting into the weeds here, but there's been so many institutions the last 6 or 5 years that have shown their true colors that, they are not to be trusted. They are not to be this or that. That people have been, I think, shocked into finding other, places to find home or to find identity or to find something. And I do think you see that even with, like conservatives who I'm definitely conservative, that it becomes that basically you're kind of touching on this, but everything old equals good and everything modern equals bad and I understand the impulse, because most things that have come down from this side, the future, like the now, a lot of those things have burned us. Increasing technology, different moralities, things like the declining birth rate, all these things that we were told, free sex, these things that we've been told for 50 years or whatever are the best things in sliced bread usually end up killing us. And so now we say, we're going to go back to the ancient or the old wisdom. But in doing that, there's no discrimination in what is to be valued, what's to be applied today, and what, is just not realistic. I don't know if you've seen that, but there's sort of this glorification impulse to if old, good. And like, not all the time is that true, even though I do think we're standing on the shoulders of giants a lot of times. And overall, I don't think it's wrong to think that my grandparents' generation was probably wiser than mine is. Pound for pound. Have you noticed that? I think there's something that connects with sobriety there. On the left, it's the other issue. The impulse is always whatever is now or next is good. My whole life, whatever's next is good. Whatever is the next thing we support, and there's no sobriety there because you don't know what's coming next. Like, so you think you can identify as a crocodile. You're just going to accept that? Wow. But it's next, so I'm about it.
Yeah, I think there's some exceptions to that. Obviously, Donald Trump is the next president. He's newer. So they don't like him. So I think the left generally views history as this upward climb into greater levels of equality. And that's their heaven on earth, is that they'll get this one day utopia where there's no discrimination between people groups and everyone will live in peace and harmony. And they blame all the wrong things for the problems that we have just about. So the arc of history bends towards equality in that scheme, social equality. For conservatives, they tend to favor patriarchy, or hierarchy, I should say, more broadly, and order primarily. I think the conservative impulse is not ideological. It's a posture that wants to preserve true and valuable things that have been passed down to us, with the recognition that it is very easy to destroy things and very hard to build them up. It takes generations to build up institutions that are trustworthy and not corrupt and will serve the people well. It takes a few minutes to burn them down. So there's this impulse to try to preserve what we have. And I think that's a good and noble impulse. It doesn't mean they can't be self-reflective about whether or not maybe they've incorporated something that's not healthy. There are principles, there are timeless principles in conservative thought, but conservatives don't make, and this is where ideology comes in, they don't make particular circumstances that are, or arrangements that are only set for a certain set of circumstances universal. So, for example, they would not take a true conservative should not take something like, let's say, even some of the freedoms that we cherish, like the Second Amendment, right? Owning a firearm. They wouldn't take something like that. They shouldn't, at least, and universalize it so that every country throughout all of time, in every place, should have this particular principle or law that you can own and use a firearm for self-defense or to protect from corrosive government and those kinds of things. Now, we in the English tradition understand why that's in place, why it's important. I totally support it 100%. But we also recognize that this was given in a context, and we're trying to maintain a context where responsible citizens who are capable of owning and using firearms can actually do so for the betterment of society. There can come a point, and in certain regions, there is a point where that might not be the best thing. And if you are going to try to prevent people from having firearms, right, then you're going to have a very strong police presence to make up for those who get them illegally and that kind of thing. So it's in a totalitarian kind of place. But there's this my only point is there's a recognition that there are certain conditions on the ground, responsible, prudent, virtuous citizenry that can use this in a responsible manner for us to have a Second Amendment. And that's been developed over centuries. in the Anglo-American world. And so it's it's something that we fought for, that we now have. We don't want to ever give it up. But a conservative would never say, and this principle of owning a firearm and being able to use it should never be regulated, infringed, whatever, across all of time and space. Once you start doing that kind of thing, you start slipping into more of an ideological framing of it, because you're taking something that's more for a particular environment and you're universalizing it and saying it's the you might even start saying it's the key that every problem would be solved if we just had this, right?
So if we were just, every country could bear arms, there'd be no totalitarianism ever.
Yeah. Well,
that kind of a thought.
Yeah. So I mean, it very well could be that is not the case. That
I'm sure a totalitarian regime could actually bear up even if the citizens were armed, because who says that a few of the citizens couldn't just band together and become the people that take over, and then they become but I'm saying applying what you're saying, like if I were to grid that issue. The issue with almost every society is a lack of the ability for the citizenry to bear arms. And if I make that the prism through which I view everything, then if I think that's the kind of utopia that there'd be, then that would take care of the
you could end up making it utopian. It's possible. I don't think conservatives tend to do that. I think they generally stop short, but that's just one example. I just pulled that out of a hat. There's many other examples you could use. But my only point to bring that up was to say, I think the impulse of conservatism is to look at circumstances and think through what's the best thing for everyone involved, for maintaining the institutions that are from creation, like the family, and we recognizing that there are different threats in different times, and so we may need different sets of policies to meet those threats. Democracy is corrupt, completely corrupt, and it's a joke. You can't even, if elections, you can't trust them and stuff. That might not be the best form, because the citizenry can't actually, they can't. You can't depend on them to actually make a wise decision, right? So someone's going to clip that and say like John's against democracy or something. I'm not.
I'm already sending it. Don't worry.
Yeah. Well, I'm not. No, I think that I prefer. I want to have a democratic republic, but I think that it's not like a hill that I have to live or die on. I mean, as conditions change, the things that we want to protect as conservatives, that we're interested in maintaining, are the creation norms, are virtue, are these timeless principles that we've been handed down. They're not systems that will produce utopia. We don't believe in utopia. We think we're going to live in a world that will always have threats this side of heaven. And so the question has always been, how do we meet those threats and provide for the people we love? And it is people, it's tangible people. Conservatism tends to be rooted in tangible things, real loves for real things, not ideas that are abstract, that have no connection with reality. And we just sacrifice people to those ideas. We don't do that as conservatives. So, they're very different systems, but the new right, if you want to go, this gets really into the weeds, but not the new right, the neoconservatives that I would say dominate the right in the United States right now, they tend to be more ideological. They think that free markets can solve everything. If you just have free markets, a strong national defense, and now I don't even know. Some of them think you should have traditional moral values. Some of them now don't. But
some of them are like, "Hey, polygamy, it's the best thing ever."
Well, or gay marriage is a conservative thing, right? I don't want trans people in sports, because women's sports, it's only women's sports, if you notice. But I think that gay marriage, that's a conservative value.
Because
that's becoming
it's
more
older than 10 years or whatever. It's older than 8 years, so it's now a traditional
conservative now. Those
value that we're conservative.
Yeah.
You bring up some points there. I mean, again, a lot of it was, the getting into ideologies and politics, which is totally fine because all of this should apply. It's interesting, as a conservative, I've been trying to put my finger on it recently, and you can let me know if this is part of what you're saying. Conservatism, when it is done well, distinguishes between universal, timeless values and the things that can change, and you're trying to figure out how do we apply the universal, timeless to the things that do change. So certain
That's right.
values that are rooted in God's order, His created order. So my dad had certain beliefs about how the world should work that he would still say today. He believed that marriage was one of the best things that could happen, and it was between a man and a woman. He believed that the nuclear family was one of God's primary designs in a society and was a very important part of any functional society. He believed certain things like that, and I don't believe that those things change. What does change is obviously governmental systems, technology, these sorts of things that, over time, it's like I should have a different policy on certain technologies than, my dad would have, because it's inevitable. But am I onto something there? It's recently that I've been able to think that through and like, okay, I don't want to become a type of conservative that sees certain things that are not the universal as inherently enemies, but can look at them and say, well, maybe it's not wise right now, or actually this could be a good thing if we think through how to use it.
No, you're spot on. I think that's exactly the right track. There is a difference between those things. So, I mean, generally we think of the timeless values as the good, the true, and the beautiful in classical education. But I think Christianity has many virtue lists that show, really they all root back into the attributes of God. I mean, God is someone who has, as Christians, we believe, laid down a certain order to the way the universe runs, not just a physical order, but a moral order. And God does not lie. God, we could look in the Ten Commandments to find some of this, but he does not, unlawfully take someone else's life. Of course, God has the rights over all our lives, but
sure,
he has given us commands that are reflective of his nature and what he values. And so those are the things that are non-negotiables for us, that we must fight for. Abortion's like such a clear issue in that sense, because it literally is about murder at the end of the day. So there really isn't any compromise. It's not like abortion's fine for this period of time, but not fine for that. This is a universal thing that you should never be able to murder someone. But there are other things like in our economic policy, ought we to have certain tariffs? If you're a free market absolutist, then you might think that that's always wrong. It's always inefficient. It's always stealing. I don't know how it's framed.
Sure.
There may be times where, though, it's actually prudent, and it could be something as simple as national defense. You need to make sure that the steel is made in your country because you need to make the tanks. You can't be dependent on a potentially hostile country. Even if it's more efficient in the free market, it doesn't really matter. You need your country to survive, right? So the survival of your country becomes more important than saving a few dollars on some steel sheets.
I see.
That's the kind of thing that does change according to circumstance. And it's not just economic policy necessarily, but there's some things that I think of, like even Jesus, when he's talking about how Moses allowed divorce for the hardness, because of the hardness of your heart. I don't know. I'm not going to pretend to know exactly how to apply that. But Jesus seems to indicate, the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. David would have, it was fine for him to eat the showbread at the temple. There seems to be this idea that that even God's law, when it was laid down in the Old Testament, some of it was for, and I'm not talking about the moral law, but some of the specifics of the civil law were meant for specific time periods and the kinds of challenges and threats they had. Obviously, they didn't have the kind of mass immigration problem that we have. So I wouldn't expect to see laws that would be directly applicable. I would see principles, which I think we do see, but it's going to be a different set of laws. And so even just based on that, looking back and seeing, okay, there were certain exceptions, there were certain laws that would be archaic now that we wouldn't need to, we have technology's taking care of some of the things like, living in a slave society and that kind of thing.
Sure.
we do have slaves, I guess you could say. They're in prisons, or we have sweatshop labor that provides some of our stuff and things like that. But it's not the same. We recognize this is not the same relationship that Moses is talking about.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, you're spot on. That's exactly how conservatives think. And they're resistant to revolutionary changes, because revolutionary changes are immediate, they're fast, and they don't consider the consequences, and they're generally end with millions of people dead.
Well, so, I understand, again, even on a lesser, I know you got to get going here soon, on a lesser, like level, revolutionary changes in terms of just speed. I understand the impulse. I really do, as someone who's conservative, and even as just someone who's grown up in our time, because more often than not, in the history of my lifetime, when something new is coming, we just, a lot of times, like, as a culture, we'll just go for it, regardless of what happens. And the consequences just happen. And then we reassess. Like, an example would be just smartphones in general. I don't think it is a universal principle to say smartphones are bad.
Right.
Like, you could go down the line and think that actually, theoretically, they're a good thing because we're using our minds, which are made by God, to help, subdue the earth, help connect people, help people potentially have a better quality of life, able to get things faster like medicine or whatever. But overall, maybe there was a net negative for a little while, or maybe there still is, in terms of it happens so fast. There's, pornography on this that kids have access to for the last decade and a half that they never did. Parents didn't even know. There's all this, and that, and we just didn't think through it or didn't know how to think about it, and so it burned us. So I understand the impulse. But I think for a conservative like me, I think I have the duty to think through those sorts of things in order to try and, if I have a family one day, hopefully provide a philosophy that is, actually interacts with things that are new based on those universal principles, rather than only say, oh yeah, absolutely yes, let's go, yeah, just have it, or only say, nope, never, it's stupid. Yeah. Anyway, a thought that I've had on that, with smartphones being an example, like, they burned us. They really did. We did not know how our brains would be affected by constantly seeing notifications. We did not see our attention span would happen. We did not see how porn addicted our society would be. And this all happened in 10 years, really. Internet was before that, but in 10 years. And a lot of parents probably just didn't even really think about it because it's all happening kind of under their feet.
They didn't. I mean, it's a tool, and when there's good things potentially that it could be used for, but I think the net damage has probably been worse. So some of these problems 100%. Are hard to solve, especially with technology. But the conservative instinct is to look at the social costs and at least put that, recognize that and put that into the calculation. You're not just looking at market forces, in other words, to determine how you regulate it, or if you regulate it, or what you do with it. You're looking at much more than market forces to figure out the good or bad, or that kind of thing.
I think that highlights your point. That's it right there. With conservatism, that's the difference, I think, between quote unquote neocons and more traditional conservatism. It's just about the bottom line or the dollar or whatever with neoconservative, seemingly. Whereas in traditional conservatism, you're seeing these more core things are more important, though. Just because you're a raging capitalist and you think, therefore, that it's totally okay to sell this sort of funny, pseudo-sexual product that's kind of a wink, whatever, in stores, and it's the new frontier, doesn't mean you should. But someone would make the argument, we're conservative, we're for capitalism, and so this is great. But no, it's not. Somehow that has to do with sobriety, right?
Well, yeah, actually it does have to do with sobriety, because someone who's sober actually has self-control, and they understand the potential for depravity and vice and where that will lead. And so they look at these devices and they're not just thinking through the good that can be done, but they're seeing the possible threats, and it directly threatens things that we care about and love, and people we care about and love. And that's ultimately what, a good way to think about it is, what's the best for, if you have children, what's the best for your kids? That's, everyone says that, right? But
sure.
Do you have a political philosophy that actually is putting the people you love and are responsible for before God directly at the center, instead of some kind of a principle that you would sacrifice them to? No principle from God's word, no principle that God has laid down in creation,
of course,
you're never going to be asked to, do what's good for your kids or obey God. Like, that's not those two things are always going to be, running along the same course.
Sure. Well, John, really do appreciate your thoughts. I know you're on a bit of a time crunch, so just want to say thank you for your time. I'm sure that those who watch this will really enjoy it. John is kind of to say one last thing about him. Check out his channel. In terms of sober thinking, that's also principled, as well as does have a spine. I'd say that he's a good example of that kind of a thing. So anyone who wants to check out his channel, his podcast, Conversations That Matter, I think we're in a new era. I think we're in a new era of hot takeness in a lack of courage culture. And we need courage, but we also need discernment on what's fake courage, because, you're just taking advantage of a market, basically. So I think you hit that line pretty well. Do appreciate it. Yep. Thanks, buddy. Appreciate it. Have you on again sometime.
All right. God bless. Looking forward to it.